The safari jeep had stopped only for a moment, just long enough for the guide to point out a pride resting beneath. An acacia tree in Tanzania, Serengeti, their golden coats blending into the dry grass like liquid sunlight. No one noticed the young male that had split from the group. No one saw him circling downwind. And when he charged, there was no roar, only the sound of claws ripping through canvas and a woman's scream that shattered the afternoon silence. Within 3 seconds, he had her by the skull. Witnesses said her body went limp immediately, dragged sideways through the doorframe as the jeep rocked violently. Everyone inside frozen in a horror so pure it erased thought itself. The guide fired 2 shots into the air. The lion paused, jaws still locked around her head, blood pouring down his muzzle in dark ribbons. Then he dragged her into the bush. By the time rangers arrived, all they found were her shoes and a trail of red disappearing into the thornveld. She was 23 years old. Her name was never released to the public, but her death was catalogued quietly, clinically as one of the worst documented lion attacks in modern history. And she's not even number 1 on this list. If you're ready to walk through the blood-soaked grasslands where apex predators still rule, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss what hunts next. There is no animal on Earth that occupies the same psychological territory as the lion. Not the bear, not the shark, not even the crocodile. The lion doesn't just kill, it rules. It has been woven into human consciousness for millennia as the symbol of power, courage, and dominance. But beneath that mythology lies a predator whose anatomy is engineered for one singular purpose: to crush vertebrae, suffocate prey, and tear flesh from bone with mechanical efficiency. A male lion's bite force reaches over 650 pounds per square inch. Their canines, up to 3 inches long, are designed not to slice, but to pierce deep, to find the spinal cord, to locate the windpipe and collapse it. Their claws, retractable and curved like surgical hooks, measure up to 1.5 inches and are capable of disemboweling a human being in a single swipe. When a lion attacks, it does not wound, it dismantles. The attacks on this list span continents and centuries, but they share a common thread. They were all documented, verified, and in many cases, witnessed by multiple people. Some occurred in the wild in the golden savannas of Africa, where lions have hunted for millions of years. Others happened in captivity, behind chain-link fences and iron bars that were supposed to keep the apex predator contained. And a few, the most disturbing, happened in villages, in bedrooms, in places where humans believed they were safe. These are not folklore. These are not exaggerations passed down through campfire stories. These are clinical records, autopsy reports, and survivor testimonies that have been locked away in archives, too graphic for the general public, too real to be dismissed as legend. We begin this countdown at number 10. A case from Zambia in 2019 that most people have never heard of, but one that reveals just how calculating a lion can be when it decides a human is prey. A cattle herder named Musanda Chatambo was guiding his herd back to the village at dusk, moving through a stretch of scrubland that bordered a national park. He had done this route 1,000 times. He knew the risks. He carried a spear and a whistle. But what he did not know was that a young male lion had been trailing the herd for over an hour, staying low in the tall grass, moving only when the cattle moved, freezing when they stopped. Witnesses later said the lion was so patient, so precise, that even the cattle didn't sense him. When Musanda bent down to tie his sandal, the lion closed the distance in 4 seconds. It hit him from behind, jaws locking onto the back of his neck, claws raking down his spine. He didn't scream. He couldn't. His trachea was already collapsed. The cattle scattered. By the time villagers arrived, the lion had dragged Musanda nearly 200 meters into the bush. They found his body at dawn. The lion had consumed his thighs, his abdomen, and part of his chest. His face was untouched, eyes still open, staring up at the sky. Number 9 takes us to India, to the Gir Forest in Gujarat, one of the last strongholds of the Asiatic lion. These lions are smaller than their African cousins, but no less deadly. In 2017, a forest ranger named Romesh Vador was conducting a routine patrol when he encountered a lioness with 2 cubs near a watering hole. Protocol dictated he back away slowly, make himself large, avoid direct eye contact. He followed every rule. But the lioness had recently lost a 3rd cub to a territorial male, and her aggression levels were catastrophically high. She charged without warning. Vador tried to run. He made it 6 steps before she was on him. Her full weight, 260 pounds, slamming into his back and driving him face first into the dirt. Her jaws found his shoulder, crushing the clavicle, her teeth puncturing his lung. He later testified that the pain was so extreme he couldn't process it, his brain simply shut down. And he entered a fugue state where he felt himself being shaken like a rag doll but could unconnect it to his own body. Other rangers arrived within minutes and drove her off with firecrackers. Romesh survived. But his right arm is now paralyzed, his shoulder reconstructed with titanium rods, and he suffers from PTSD so severe he can no longer enter a forest without sedation. Number 8 occurred in Kenya's Tsavo region in 2015, a place already infamous for its man-eating lions. A construction worker named Samuel Keryuki was sleeping in a tent at a work camp when a lion tore through the canvas at 3 in the morning. The attack was over in seconds. The lion bit down on Samuel's leg, dragged him out of the tent, and began to feed while he was still alive. His co-workers heard the screams and rushed out with machetes and flashlights, but the lion didn't retreat. It stood over Samuel's body, growling, blood dripping from its muzzle, daring them to come closer. They threw rocks, they shouted. The lion didn't move. Only when a supervisor fired a shotgun into the air did the lion finally abandon the kill and vanish into the night. Samuel was airlifted to Nairobi, but he died en route from blood loss and shock. The lion was never found. And at number 7, we return to Tanzania, to a village called Nachingwea, where in 2018, a pride of lions began a coordinated hunting campaign against humans that lasted 3 weeks. They killed 14 people. Most of the victims were taken at night, dragged from their homes through windows and thin wooden doors. But one attack stands out for its sheer brutality. A woman named Fatima was washing clothes at a communal water source just after sunset when 2 lionesses emerged from the tree line. She ran. They didn't chase her. They flanked her. One came from the left, the other from the right. And they converged on her simultaneously, a technique typically reserved for buffalo or wildebeest. She was dead before she hit the ground. Villagers found her body the next morning. The lions had eaten everything below her ribcage. Her torso was hollowed out, her organs removed with surgical precision. The pride was eventually hunted down and killed by wildlife officers. But the memory of those 3 weeks still haunts Nachingwea. Parents don't let their children outside after dark. Doors are reinforced with metal, and every night someone stands watch. But these 7 attacks, as horrific as they are only the beginning. The cases that follow involve pain that no human should ever endure, predators that hunted with intelligence that borders on terrifying, and deaths so prolonged that the victims begged for it to end. At number 6, we encounter a case that forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Lions, remember? They learn. And in some cases, they develop preferences. South Africa, 2012. A game reserve outside Hoedspruit. A wildlife photographer named David Schultz had been documenting a specific pride for nearly 8 months, always maintaining the required distance, always staying inside his vehicle, always respecting the unspoken rules of coexistence. But on a humid February afternoon, his Land Cruiser broke down. The engine simply died, stranding him in the middle of open grassland with the pride less than 50 meters away. He radioed for help. Backup was 20 minutes out. For the first 15 minutes, nothing happened. The lions lounged in the shade, indifferent to his presence. Then the matriarch, a scarred female the rangers had nicknamed Broken Tooth, stood up. She walked directly toward the vehicle, her gait slow and deliberate, her eyes locked onto David through the windshield. He didn't move. He barely breathed. She circled the Land Cruiser once, twice, then placed her front paws on the driver's side door and peered inside. David could hear her breathing. He could smell the rot of old kills on her breath. Then she bit down on the side mirror, ripped it clean off, and used it as leverage to reach the open window. David tried to roll it up, but the electronics were dead. She got her head through the gap. Her jaws snapped inches from his face. He threw himself into the passenger seat. But she was already pulling herself through, her massive body contorting, shoulders scraping against the doorframe. He kicked at her muzzle. She didn't flinch. Her claws found his leg, hooking into the muscle, dragging him back toward her. He grabbed a camera tripod and jammed it into her eye. She released him, roaring in pain, and withdrew from the vehicle. Rangers arrived moments later. David survived with a severed Achilles tendon and deep lacerations across his thigh, but he never photographed lions again. And Broken Tooth was euthanized a week later when she attacked another vehicle in the same manner. The reserve staff concluded she had learned that cars contained food. She had adapted. She had evolved. Number 5 takes us to Zimbabwe in 2009. To a village near Muanji National Park, where a man named Elias Mafofu experienced an attack so drawn out, so methodical, that it shattered every assumption about how lions kill. Elias was working in his maize field at dawn when a male lion emerged from the tree line and walked directly toward him. No stalking, no ambush. Just a straight, confident approach. Elias ran for the nearest tree and climbed. The lion sat at the base and waited. For 6 hours. Villagers saw the standoff and alerted wildlife officials, but by the time they arrived, the lion had begun climbing. Lions rarely climb trees. They're too heavy. Too muscular, but this one hauled itself up branch by branch, claws splintering the bark, pulling itself higher with terrifying determination. Elias climbed as far as the branches would hold him. The lion followed. When Elias could go no higher, the lion paused on a thick limb 3 meters below and simply stared at him. Then it began to shake the tree. Slowly at first, then with increasing violence, throwing its weight side to side until the entire trunk swayed. Elias clung to the branches, screaming for help, but the nearest villagers were too afraid to approach. The shaking continued for another hour. Then a branch snapped. Elias fell. He landed hard, his left leg shattering on impact. The lion descended calmly, almost casually, and stood over him. Oh, it didn't bite his neck, didn't go for the throat. It bit into his stomach and began to pull. Elias remained conscious for the first 30 seconds, long enough to feel his intestines being drawn out of his body, long enough to understand exactly what was happening. Wildlife officers arrived and shot the lion, but Elias died before he could be transported to a hospital. The autopsy revealed he had been partially consumed while his heart was still beating. At number 4, we cross into the realm of captivity, where the illusion of control evaporates in seconds. Las Vegas, 2003. A private exotic animal facility where a trainer named Michael Stokes had worked with big cats for over 15 years. He had bottle-fed lion cubs, walked adolescents on leashes, performed in shows where he placed his head inside their mouths. He believed he had a bond with them. He was wrong. During a routine feeding, a 4-year-old male named Tyson, who Michael had raised since birth, turned on him without provocation. No warning growl. No flattened ears. One moment, Tyson was eating from a bowl. The next, he had Michael by the forearm, dragging him across the enclosure. Michael screamed for his assistant to open the safety gate. She froze. Tyson bit down harder, crushing the radius and ulna, splintering bone through skin. Then he released the arm and went for the head. His jaws closed around Michael's skull, canines punching through the temporal bone, piercing the brain. Michael's body convulsed. Tyson shook him left, right, left, then dropped him and walked away. The entire attack lasted 11 seconds. Michael was airlifted to a trauma center where surgeons removed bone fragments from his frontal lobe. He survived but lost all memory of the attack, all memory of the previous 6 months, and most of his motor function. Tyson was not euthanized. He lived another 12 years in the same enclosure, fed by handlers who never turned their backs on him again. And now we arrive at the top 3. These are not just attacks. These are case studies in predatory intelligence, in calculated violence, in the kind of horror that rewrites a person's understanding of what animals are capable of. Number 3 occurred in Mozambique in 2008, in a rural district where lions had been largely extirpated for decades. But drought had driven a coalition of 2 males across the border from Kruger National Park, and they entered a village called Maramu at night. Over the course of 72 hours, they killed 9 people. But one attack eclipsed all the others in its depravity. A schoolteacher named Anna Lopes was sleeping in her concrete house doors locked, windows barred, when the lions began to dig. They excavated a tunnel beneath the foundation, working in shifts, moving earth with their paws until they had created a gap wide enough to squeeze through. They emerged inside her bedroom at 2 in the morning. Anna woke to the sound of breathing. She turned on a flashlight. Both lions were standing at the foot of her bed, eyes reflecting the light, mouths open. She screamed. The first lion lunged, pinning her to the mattress, jaws closing around her throat but not biting down, just holding her, suffocating her, slowly. The second lion began to feed on her legs. She thrashed. She couldn't breathe. The pressure on her throat increased until her trachea collapsed, and then the first lion released her and joined the feeding. Neighbors heard the commotion and threw stones at the house, but the lions didn't leave until they had consumed most of her lower body. When authorities arrived at dawn, they found the tunnel, the blood-soaked bedroom, and Anna's upper torso still lying on the bed. The lions were shot the following night, but the tunnel remained, a scar in the earth that no one in Maramu has filled in. They leave it open as a reminder, because when you understand what's coming at number 2 and number 1, you realize that even Anna Lopes was lucky compared to what some people endured. Number 2 is a name that still circulates in whispers among safari guides and wildlife researchers, a case so disturbing that several documentaries have refused to cover it in full detail. Tanzania, 2005. The Ruviji River Delta. A French tourist named Isabelle Renard was part of a walking safari on experience. MARKETED as intimate, authentic, where clients trek through the bush on foot with armed guides, tracking animals at ground level. It is statistically one of the most dangerous activities a person can undertake in Africa, but the risk is supposed to be mitigated by experience, by protocol, by the guide's ability to read the land. Isabelle's guide was a man named Joshua, a tracker with 18 years of experience and a rifle that had dropped charging elephants. But no amount of experience can account for a lion that has been watching you for 3 days. The pride had been following the group since they entered the delta, moving parallel to them through dense riverine forest, never showing themselves, never making a sound. On the 3rd day, as the group stopped for lunch near a dried riverbed, the lions made their move. But they didn't attack the group. They attacked Joshua. The alpha male came from behind, hitting him so fast that he didn't have time to unsling the rifle. The lion's jaws closed around his neck, severing the carotid artery in an instant. He was dead in seconds. The rifle fell into the sand. And then the pride turned their attention to the tourists. For people, no weapons. 200 meters from the nearest vehicle, Isabelle ran. The others scattered in different directions, screaming, hoping to confuse the pride. It didn't work. The Lionesses selected Isabelle and gave chase. She made it 60 meters before the first lioness brought her down. Claws hooking into her back, pulling her to the ground. She tried to crawl. The second lioness bit into her calf, dragging her backward. Isabelle screamed for help, but the other tourists were already being pursued. The lionesses began to feed immediately. Not on her legs, not on her torso. They started with her hands. Witnesses, including a backup guide who arrived minutes later, said the lions seemed to be testing her, biting and releasing, watching her reactions, as if gauging how much fight she had left. She was still conscious, still moving. One lioness bit into her abdomen and tore a section of her intestines free, pulling nearly 2 meters of viscera out of her body while she screamed. The other lioness bit down on her shoulder, dislocating the joint, then shook her violently enough that her spine fractured in 3 places. The backup guide fired 2 shots into the air. The lionesses stopped feeding, but didn't retreat. They stood over Isabelle's body, growling, blood dripping from their muzzles, daring him to come closer. He fired a 3rd shot directly at one of them, striking her in the shoulder. She roared and lunged at him. He dropped the rifle and ran. The lionesses returned to Isabelle. By the time a ranger unit arrived with automatic weapons, she had been dead for less than a minute. The lions had consumed her legs, her arms, and most of her chest. Her face was untouched. Her eyes were still open. The pride fled into the bush and was never tracked. Isabelle's husband, who had stayed behind at the lodge, was told she had died instantly. He wasn't shown the photographs. He wasn't given the full report. But the guides know, the rangers know. And they will never speak her name without looking over their shoulders first. But even Isabelle's death has prolonged, as agonizing as it was, does not claim the top spot. Because number 1 is not just the worst lion attack ever recorded, it is one of the worst animal attacks of any kind in modern history. A case that involves not minutes of suffering, but hours and a level of predatory intelligence that forced researchers to reconsider everything they thought they knew about lion behavior. Kenya, 1998. Tsavo East National Park. A conservation biologist named Dr. Samuel Muanji was conducting a solo field study on lion population dynamics, tracking a pride that had recently established territory near the Galana River. He had been in the bush for 6 weeks, living out of a small tent, radioing in every 3 days to confirm his location and status. On August 14th, he missed his check-in. Search teams were dispatched 48 hours later. They found his campsite destroyed, tent shredded, equipment scattered, blood trails leading in multiple directions, but they didn't find his body. For 3 days, they searched. On the 3rd day, a ranger named Kimani heard something. A low, wet sound, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from a thicket of wait-a-bit thorns nearly a kilometer from the campsite. He approached cautiously, and there, in a clearing barely 10 meters wide, he found Dr. Muanji. He was alive, barely. A male lion was lying next to him, not feeding, not moving, just resting in the shade. Dr. Muanji's legs were gone. Both of them severed at the hip, the stumps blackened with dried blood and crawling with flies. His left arm was missing from the elbow down. His right hand had only 2 fingers, but he was conscious. His eyes tracked Kimani's movements. His mouth opened and closed, trying to form words, but no sound came out. His vocal cords had been damaged, likely from screaming. Kimani radioed for backup, his voice shaking so badly the dispatch had to ask him to repeat himself 3 times. When the team arrived, they found evidence that Dr. Muanji had been held captive by the lion for at least 2 full days. The lion had fed on him in intervals, removing a limb, eating part of it, then resting, guarding the body, preventing scavengers from approaching. Drag marks indicated the lion had moved him twice, relocating him to different clearings, as if trying to keep him hidden. Dr. Muanji had somehow remained conscious through most of it, likely due to shock and dehydration preventing him from bleeding out quickly. The lion didn't flee when the rangers arrived. It stood over Dr. Muanji's body and roared, It's a sound so deep and primal that one ranger later described it as feeling like the earth itself was screaming. They shot the lion 6 times before it finally collapsed. Dr. Muanji was airlifted to Nairobi, where surgeons spent 11 hours stabilizing him. He survived the initial trauma, but developed sepsis from the infected wounds. He died 4 days later, never having spoken a coherent sentence, never having explained what those 2 days in the thicket were like. What thoughts passed through his mind as he watched a lion slowly consume his body piece by piece? The autopsy revealed over 60 distinct bite marks, many of them inflicted while he was still alive. Many of them showing signs of partial healing, evidence that the lion had been feeding on him for far longer than 2 days. Some researchers believe Dr. Muanji may have been held for nearly a week. The lion's body was examined by veterinary pathologists. It was an old male, approximately 14 years old, with severe dental damage and a partially healed injury to its jaw that would have made hunting normal prey extremely difficult. It had learned that humans were easier to kill and easier to keep, and it had kept Dr. Muanji alive as long as possible, feeding sparingly, preserving the meat. This is not supposed to happen. Lions are not supposed to cache live prey, but the evidence was undeniable. The lion had turned Dr. Muanji into a larder. The aftermath of Dr. Muanji's death sent shockwaves through the conservation community that are still reverberating today. His field journals were recovered from the campsite, bloodstained and partially destroyed, but legible enough to reconstruct his final days. The entries became increasingly erratic as the week progressed. On August 10th, he noted unusual lion activity near his tent vocalizations at odd hours. Fresh tracks circling the perimeter each morning, a persistent sense of being watched. On August 12th, he wrote that he had seen the same male lion 3 times in a single day. Always at a distance, always alone, always staring directly at him. The final entry, dated August 13th, contained only 7 words. "He knows I'm here. He's waiting." The page was smeared with dirt and what forensic analysts later confirmed was lion saliva, suggesting the journal had been in the lion's mouth at some point, possibly while Dr. Muanji was still writing. But the true horror of this case extends beyond the physical trauma. Psychologists who reviewed the medical reports noted that Dr. Muanji exhibited signs of extreme psychological torture in his final hours. When rangers first found him, his remaining hand was clenched around a small stick, and he had used it to scratch words into the dirt beside him. Most were illegible, but 3 phrases were clear enough to document: "Still awake," "Can't die," and "Please shoot." The implications are almost unbearable. He had been aware, fully conscious, trapped in his own disintegrating body, unable to escape, unable to lose consciousness, forced to endure every moment as the lion returned again and again to feed. Some trauma specialists have suggested that the human brain, in extreme circumstances, enters a state of hyper-awareness that prevents unconsciousness, cruel evolutionary remnant designed to keep us fighting for survival even when survival is impossible. Dr. Muanji may have experienced every second of those 2 to 7 days with perfect clarity. The lion's behavior also raised questions that wildlife biologists are still grappling with. Detailed examination of the site revealed that the lion had constructed what can only be described as a feeding station. He had dragged Dr. Muanji into a thicket dense enough to block aerial views, positioned him in shade to slow decomposition, and urinated around the perimeter to mark territory and ward off other predators. This is behavior typically associated with leopards, not lions. Lions are social hunters, communal feeders. They don't hide kills, they don't cache prey. But this male had done exactly that, and he had done it with a level of planning that suggests cognitive processing far beyond instinct. Some researchers theorized that his jaw injury had forced him to adapt to develop new hunting strategies, to learn that humans were not only easier to catch, but easier to keep alive for extended feeding. He had become, in essence, a specialist, a human predator. And if rangers hadn't found Dr. Muanji when they did, there is no telling how long the lion would have continued this pattern, or how many more people he might have taken. In the months following the incident, Kenya Wildlife Service launched an investigation into lion attacks across East Africa, compiling data from the previous 2 decades. What they discovered was deeply unsettling. Over 40 cases shared similarities with Dr. Muanji's attack-prolonged captivity. Evidence of repeated feeding over multiple days, victims found alive, but mutilated, lions that exhibited abnormal territorial behavior around human remains. Most of these cases had been dismissed as anomalies, outliers, the actions of sick or injured animals acting out of desperation. But when viewed collectively, a pattern emerged. Lions were learning. In regions where human populations encroached on their territory, where natural prey had been depleted, where conflict was frequent, some lions had begun to view humans not as threats, but as a viable food source. And a small percentage, less than 1%, but statistically significant, had learned to exploit humans in ways that suggested tool use, problem-solving, and long-term planning. One case stood out. Zimbabwe, 2002. A farmer named Tendai Moyo disappeared from his homestead. His family searched for 3 days before finding his body in a dry stream nearly 5 kilometers from his home. He had been partially consumed, but what shocked investigators was the state of the surrounding area. The Lioness young male, later identified through paw prints and scat analysis, had dug a shallow pit, placed Tendai's body inside, and covered it with branches and dirt. When scavengers disturbed the site, the lion returned, chased them off, and recovered the body. This continued for over a week. The lion was essentially farming. He had created a food cache and was defending it, returning to feed as needed, preserving the meat through burial. When wildlife officers finally tracked and killed the lion, they found partially digested human remains in his stomach that were at least 10 days old, meaning he had been feeding on Tendai's body for far longer than decomposition should have allowed. The burial had kept the meat cool, protected from the sun, slowing bacterial growth. The lion had invented refrigeration. These are not mindless beasts. These are apex predators with 4 million years of evolutionary refinement. Brains capable of learning, adapting, remembering. And in the 21st century, as their habitat shrinks and human populations explode, they are encountering us more frequently, testing our defenses, probing our weaknesses, learning our patterns. Every attack adds data to their collective knowledge. Every successful kill reinforces the lesson. Humans are soft. Humans are slow. Humans are prey. Dr. Muanji's death was not an aberration. It was a warning. And the worst part of the detail that keeps wildlife officers awake at night till that the lion that killed him was not unique. He was not the only one. In the years since his death, at least 12 other lions across Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique have exhibited similar behavior. They have been shot, poisoned, trapped. But for every one that is killed, researchers believe there are 3 more that have learned the same lessons and simply have not been caught yet. They are out there now, in the grasslands and the forests and the edges of villages, watching, waiting, calculating. And they know that humans are not the apex predator anymore. We are the prey. The long-term effects of surviving a lion attack are not limited to physical scars. Dr. Helena Norberg, a trauma psychologist who has worked with over 30 lion attack survivors across southern Africa, describes a condition she calls apex predator syndrome, a form of PTSD so severe that it fundamentally rewires the survivor's relationship with the natural world. Patients report an inability to sleep in darkness, a compulsion to check windows and doors. Dozens of times each night, auditory hallucinations of growling or heavy breathing. And a sensation she describes as permanent prey awareness, where the brain remains locked in a state of hypervigilance, interpreting every shadow, every rustling leaf, every distant sound as an imminent threat. One survivor, a Zambian park ranger named Joseph Banda, who lost his left leg to a lioness in 2011, told Dr. Norberg that he can no longer look at his own dog without feeling his heart rate spike. "The shape of the skull," he said. "The teeth, it's all the same. They're all predators, and I'm always food." But the psychological trauma extends beyond the survivors. Entire communities that have experienced lion attacks undergo a collective transformation. In Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province, where a coalition of 6 males killed 35 people between 2004 and 2008. Sociologists documented a phenomenon they termed territorial inversion. The human population effectively ceded control of the night. After sunset, the villages became ghost towns. No one traveled, no one worked. Children were kept indoors, sometimes locked in rooms for their own safety. Economies collapsed because farmers could untend fields in the early morning or late evening when temperatures were tolerable. Schools closed because teachers refused to walk the necessary distances. And even after the lions were killed, even after years had passed, the behavioral patterns remained. The fear had become cultural, passed from parents to children, embedded in the collective memory. When researchers interviewed teenagers born after the attacks, they discovered that many of them had never been outside after dark. Not once. They had inherited a trauma they never personally experienced. The evolutionary implications are staggering. For over 200,000 years, humans have been running from lions. We evolved in Africa alongside them, and they shaped us just as much as we shaped our environment. Our fear of the dark, our instinct to seek high ground, our tendency to form tight social groups for protection, these are not abstract psychological traits. These are survival mechanisms hardwired into our DNA by predators that hunted us relentlessly. And for a brief window of time, maybe 10,000 years, maybe less, we convinced ourselves we had escaped that relationship. We built cities. We invented guns. We drove lions into smaller and smaller territories and told ourselves we were safe. But the data tells a different story. Lion attacks are increasing, not decreasing. Between 1990 and 2020, documented fatal lion attacks in sub-Saharan Africa rose by over 300%. Some of this is due to better record keeping, but the majority is driven by habitat loss, human encroachment, and the simple fact that there are more people living in lion territory than ever before. We didn't escape the food chain. We just forgot we were part of it. And then there are the theories whispered among researchers, dismissed by mainstream science, but persistent enough that they deserve examination. The theory of ghost lions, individuals that have learned to avoid all human detection, that hunt exclusively at night, that take victims from the edges of villages and leave no witnesses, no tracks, no evidence. The theory is considered fringe, borderline pseudoscience, but it is based on a troubling statistical anomaly across Tanzania, Kenya, and Mozambique. An average of 200 people per year disappear in rural areas adjacent to national parks. Some are attributed to crocodiles, some to hippos, some to human conflict. But a significant percentage, roughly 30%, are never explained. No bodies are found, no witnesses come forward. The people simply vanish. And in several cases, villagers report hearing lions in the vicinity on the night of the disappearance. But wildlife officers find no evidence of lion activity when they investigate. The prevailing explanation is that scavengers consume the remains too quickly for recovery, but a minority of researchers believe something else is happening. They believe there are lions that have perfected the art of hunting humans, that understand forensic investigation well enough to avoid leaving evidence, that have become so specialized in human predation that they are essentially invisible. One case fuels this theory more than any other. South Africa, 2016. Kruger National Park. A group of poachers entered the park illegally, armed with high-powered rifles, intending to kill rhinos for their horns. They were experienced, well-equipped, and moving in darkness using night vision equipment. 3 days later, their bodies were found scattered across a 2-kilometer stretch of bushveld. All 3 had been killed by lions. But the circumstances were bizarre. The men still had their rifles. They had fired ballistics confirmed over 20 rounds discharge, but none of the bullets had struck a lion. There was no blood trail, no wounded animal. And yet, all 3 men had been killed in textbook lion fashion, crushed vertebrae. Suffocation, trauma to the skull and neck. The lions had attacked simultaneously from multiple directions in complete darkness, against armed men with night vision who should have seen them coming. Park officials concluded it was a coordinated ambush by a pride that had learned to avoid gunfire, but several forensic details didn't align. The spacing of the bodies suggested the men had been killed over the course of several hours, not in a single attack. And the consumption patterns were unusual. Lead's body had been fed on equally, as if multiple lions were sharing the kills methodically, taking turns. The pride was never identified. No lions in that region exhibited injuries consistent with a firefight. And poaching activity in that sector of Kruger dropped to 0 for the following 18 months. The lions, whoever they were, had sent a message. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of lion attacks is not their frequency or their brutality. It's their inevitability. Every predictive model, every ecological analysis, every long-term study reaches the same conclusion. As long as humans and lions occupy overlapping territory, attacks will continue. And as climate change accelerates, as droughts intensify, as prey populations collapse, lions will become more desperate, more willing to risk human contact, more likely to view us as a primary food source rather than a last resort. Conservation efforts have successfully stabilized lion populations in some regions, but that success comes with a hidden cost. More lions mean more interactions. More interactions mean more attacks. We are approaching a tipping point where the choice becomes binary: coexist with lions and accept a baseline level of human predation, or eradicate them entirely and lose one of the planet's most ecologically critical apex predators. There is no middle ground. There is no compromise. And the decision is being made right now, in villages and parks and government offices across Africa, one attack at a time. Dr. Muanji understood this. In one of his earlier journal entries, written months before his death, he reflected on the relationship between humans and lions with a clarity that now reads as prophetic. "We fear them because they remind us what we used to be," he wrote. "Prey, vulnerable, mortal. And we hate them for it. But they are not cruel. They are not evil. They are simply doing what evolution designed them to do. And if we cannot accept that, if we cannot find a way to live alongside them without demanding their submission or their extinction, then we deserve what's coming. Because the lions aren't going anywhere. And neither are we. And something has to give." 7 years after his death, those words feel less like philosophy and more like prophecy. The worst lion attacks ever recorded are not relics of the past. They are warnings of the future. And the next one could happen tonight. But what if I told you there's something even worse waiting in the shadows? Something that makes these attacks feel like a calculated mercy compared to the mindless, relentless savagery it brings. Click the video on screen right now. The worst hippo attacks ever recorded, ranked. Because when you see what a 3-ton rage machine can do to a human body, you'll realize the lions at least killed with purpose. What's waiting in the river's kills for sport?